The Netflix docuseries How to Become a Mob Boss gives viewers a glimpse into the world of some of the most successful mafia bosses throughout history. This series shows people how these men went from having nothing to becoming some of the most influential figures in the mob. Of course, not everyone is cut out to run a criminal empire. Throughout this series, some big reveals were shared about how these mobsters rose to the top. In today's video, we're going to go over some of the most shocking things we learned while watching this miniseries. This includes an inside look into the careers of Al Capone, Frank Lucas, Toto Riina, John Gotti, Whitey Bulger, and Pablo Escobar. Let's start off with one of the earliest figures to dominate the world of bootlegging, Al Capone. Al Capone's childhood, departure from education. Al Capone was born to immigrant parents. Growing up, he showed a lot of potential as a student, but was also known to have a rebellious streak. He quit school at the age of 14. Some say that he was expelled for hitting a teacher, while others claim he was simply bored of going to class and wanted to make money. Al grew up in a poor family that didn't have much. This could have been what fueled his entrepreneurial spirit. His father gifted him a shoemaking kit on his birthday, which he took to the streets to start earning money. Even though Al Capone had the initiative to earn money, finances weren't going in his favor. To make it worse, there was competition on the block. He needed to find a way to make more money. Then the young boy witnessed something that gave him an idea. He observed an incident where made men used ruthless and violent tactics to extort money from a business owner. Al gathered a gang of his own and used the same violent tactics to take money from his competition. Other kids were doing the work, and Al was reaping in the profits. Mentorship in the Mafia, Torrio and Yale. Johnny Torrio was a prominent force in the Chicago outfit. He was very influential, and during his time, many young men looked up to him. He noticed potential in Al Capone and became a mentor for him. He had Al run tasks for him, like delivering weapons in paper bags. Johnny was also a mentor for Frankie Yale, who became Al Capone's second boss. He learned important lessons from both of these influential mafia figures. Johnny taught him to dress for success, always have money, and to always keep his mouth shut when necessary. Frankie taught him how to be one of the most feared men in organized crime. Capone's bootlegging empire. Al Capone's rise to power mainly came through bootlegging. This empire started under Johnny Torrio's influence. The prohibition had started, putting a ban on the sale of alcohol, but people still wanted to buy liquor. Johnny Torrio and Al Capone were ready to make a fortune, but there was only one problem. The outfit's boss at the time, Big Jim Colosimo, said no to the plan. He was content on managing his restaurant, casino, and brothel. He had no desire to bring on any extra trouble. But these mobsters already had their eyes on the dollar signs. If he wasn't going to give them his seal of approval, they would just have to get rid of him. Big Jim was shot to death in his own restaurant. No one has ever been prosecuted for this crime. However, it's speculated that Frankie Yale placed the hit under Johnny's orders. It's also believed that Al Capone's involvement in this assassination was a major stepping stone in creating his own criminal hierarchy. With Big Jim out of the way, Johnny Torrio was the new boss of the Chicago outfit, and Al Capone was his right-hand man. A bootlegging empire was launched that reached far beyond Chicago. Frank Lucas, revolutionizing the drug trade. Some of the most notorious mobsters of all time are known for their revolutionary tactics, no matter how brutal they were. In his younger years, Frank Lucas was a street thief, but he had confidence. The more he stole, the more confident he was in his skills. So his robberies got bigger, going from robbing local bars at gunpoint for cash to stealing diamonds from jewelry stores. He caught the attention of Bumpy Johnson, a notorious drug trafficker. Bumpy acted as a mentor, teaching Frank about the trade. After Bumpy passed, Frank used this knowledge to rise to the top. He ended up becoming a heroin kingpin who created rules of his own. In order to get to the top, Frank Lucas knew he needed to supply the people with what they wanted. If he wanted to lure the consumer away from the competition, he needed a better product. The only way to do this was to sell the purest form of heroin available. His heroin was called Blue Magic, and it was 98% pure. Just because Frank had a better product didn't mean his competition was going to up and disappear. This was also something he would have to deal with. He would use violent tactics when necessary to silence his competition. But when you combine drugs and violence, it attracts the attention of the police. That was no problem for Frank Lucas. He knew that police officers were people like everyone else, and everyone has a price tag. Frank would pay off police officers, and they stayed off of his trail. Salvatore Toto Riina, Reign of Terror. As viewers watch How to Become a Mob Boss, they learn a tip from each of the 6 figures that are covered. When it comes to Salvatore Toto Riina's advice to make it to the top, it's to kill anyone that gets in your way. It's no secret that many of the most influential mafia bosses were famous for their reign of terror, but Toto Riina took terror to a whole new level. During his reign, it's estimated that he killed between 800 and 1,000 people. Murder was just part of the business to him. When Toto became the boss, he wanted to be something that technically didn't exist at the time. He wanted to be the boss of all the bosses. The main goal of a lot of mobsters is money. They wanted to be surrounded by luxuries and have an endless stream of money coming in. But the money wasn't important to Toto. He wanted power. During Toto Riina's era, there was a commission with all of the heads of the mafia families. At this point, the commission didn't have a boss. It wasn't heard of, but it was something that Toto aspired to be. In order to make this happen, he would have to eliminate all of the mafia bosses that were on the commission at the time. But before this could happen, he made allies within. This way, once the rivals were taken out, he would already have people within the other crime families that would align with him. Riina's nemesis, Tommaso Buscetta. Toto Riina's plan to have the other mafia bosses killed off went as orchestrated, except for one problem. Tommaso Buscetta fled to Brazil. This didn't stop Toto's madness. He had several of Tommy's relatives killed, including his sons, brothers, and nephews. His plan to escape didn't keep him safe for long. The Brazilian government caught Tommaso Buscetta, and he was sent back to Sicily. At this point in time, all he had on his mind was revenge. He was already in legal trouble, so why not work with the law and bring down his enemy? Tommaso agreed to work with the mafia prosecutor Giovanni Falcone. Toto Riina caught wind of this plan and wasn't going to go down easy. He arranged to have Falcone assassinated in a brutal explosion. But this wasn't enough to keep the feared mobster safe. The information supplied by Tommaso Buscetta was enough to build a case and finally put Toto behind bars. John Gotti, defying mafia norms. John Gotti, better known as the Dapper Don and the Teflon Don, was unlike other mafia bosses in history. He didn't play by the rules of others. This could have been what helped him rise, but it's what ultimately brought him down. Yes, the mafia is involved in illegal activities, but they have rules in place to follow. If mafia members don't follow these rules, things can go sideways fast. Some of these rules include what criminal activities crime families can participate in, to always keep your mouth shut and staying loyal to your mafia family, especially your closest allies. John Gotti was a powerful force in the Gambino family, but there was one problem. The crime family had a strict no-drug policy. This didn't work for John, who was involved in the drug trade. Instead of following the rules set by his crime family, he made a plan of his own. He brought his most trusted ally into this plan, Sammy the Bull Gravano, and orchestrated an assassination of the Gambino family boss, Paul Castellano. With Paul out of the way, John Gotti was promoted to the boss and was able to continue working in the drug trade. There has always been something polarizing about John Gotti. He attracted a lot of attention, which is something most mafia members try to avoid, especially the bosses. That wasn't John's style. He broke the cardinal rule of the mafia and was always talking. Talking too much is eventually what brought him down and turned one of his closest allies against him. Sammy the Bull made an appearance on the Netflix miniseries and gave his take on the situation. When John Gotti was busted talking on the recorded tapes, he said some things that Sammy believed were ratting him out. This was all the evidence Sammy needed to know John Gotti and the crime family couldn't be trusted, so he switched sides and became a government informant to get back at him. James Whitey Bulger, Boston's most feared mobster. James Whitey Bulger was one of the most feared mobsters in Boston. This mobster climbed to the top by being a master manipulator who was always ahead of the plan. He built a criminal empire and was able to evade the authorities for 16 years on the run. Oddly enough, his master plan was foiled by a cat. Crime was something that Whitey had been involved in since an early age. He spent time in prison for a bank robbery during the 1950s and 60s. When he was released from jail, he started an organized crime empire with his partner Stephen Flemmi. But here's the kicker. In the 1970s, he was providing the FBI information about rival mobsters. Whitey didn't get to the top by being like every other criminal on the streets. He was a smart man and knew how to work people. When he was approached about being an informant, he used his opportunity to manipulate the FBI. With corrupt agents on his side, he would always be one step ahead. Ultimately, in 1994, there was a serious case building up against Whitey. The corrupt agents gave him an advanced warning, allowing him enough time to flee with his lover. While he was a fugitive, Whitey had a plan to blend in. He had a lot of money and the ability to read people. He would find people who were fallen on hard times and offer them a hefty pay in exchange for their ID and social security number. He would then use their identities to blend into society. However, the search was still on for this notorious criminal and his wife. Ultimately, a woman recognized Whitey's lover in the images that were shown in the news. Whitey's wife had bonded with this woman over her cat, and the lady didn't forget her face. Whitey was sent back to prison in 2013 and given 2 life sentences, but he passed away in 2018. Pablo Escobar, from smuggler to drug lord. Last but not least is the notorious drug lord Pablo Escobar. He started out as a cigarette smuggler and became a kingpin who made over $30 billion. When Pablo first started selling cocaine, he had one big problem. That was his competition, Fabio Restrepo. He arranged to have his biggest competitor taken out so his group, the Medellin cartel, could dominate the cocaine trade in the area. And that's exactly what he did. Not only did he become the cocaine kingpin of Medellin in the 1970s, but all of Colombia and other parts of the world. It's estimated that at one point, roughly 80% of the world's cocaine supply was going through Escobar's group. While he had built a drug empire, not everyone in the community viewed Pablo Escobar as a villain. He gave back to the community by providing low-cost housing and other necessities. He built churches, public parks, and sports recreation areas that the public could use. He even bought an estate that he turned into a zoo, paying for all the animals and staff. Despite the good he was doing for his community, it wasn't enough to evade the pressure of the law. There was increasing pressure to catch this infamous drug lord. However, Pablo always said that he would rather have a tombstone in Colombia than a jail cell in the US. Authorities knew that if they wanted to capture him, they would have to get on his level. They offered a plea deal where all the drug lord had to do was confess to one crime of his choosing. By doing this, he was also allowed to set his own conditions that authorities would agree to. This included allowing him to have his own prison built overlooking Medellin. The prison guards would be on his payroll. He would have a say in which inmates were allowed in his prison. This was allegedly to prevent rival gang members from entering the location. All of Pablo Escobar's demands were met, basically allowing him to continue business as usual. However, word got out about illegal activity going on in this prison. Pablo escaped, which launched a manhunt called Search Block. Ultimately, the notorious drug lord met his fate during a police shootout when he was found hiding out in a house in Medellin. You can learn more about each figure's story by watching the Netflix miniseries How to Become a Mob Boss. This interesting docuseries takes us through the rise and fall of some of the most notorious mafia figures in history. From Al Capone's ruthless tactics in his younger days to Pablo Escobar's way of turning the public in his favor, each mafia figure taught viewers how to go above the rules to get what you want. Which mob boss do you think was the most powerful? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. That's all for today's video. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to see more Mafia Mystique content.